I spent 3 years learning how to become invisible inside the Blackwood estate, and I believed that was the only way I could protect the quiet life I had built for myself. My name is Emily Carter, and every morning I walk through rooms filled with priceless artwork, polished marble floors, and reminders that I belong to a world far beyond my own. I cleaned spaces where powerful decisions were made, prepared coffee for people whose names appeared in newspapers, and listened to conversations about wealth, business, and influence while knowing that nobody in those rooms ever wondered about the woman standing quietly beside them. To the Blackwood family, I was simply the maid who knew how to stay out of the way, the person who entered when needed and disappeared when the important conversations began. For a long time, I believed being unnoticed was a kind of safety. If people underestimated me, they would never think to question me. If they never asked about my past, they would never discover the truth I had spent years trying to protect. I had learned that attention often brought problems, and silence allowed me to keep the promises I had made long before I ever stepped inside that mansion. But I never understood that the same people who ignored me were often the ones revealing things they never intended for me to know. Vincent Blackwood was the center of that world. His name carried the kind of reputation that made people choose their words carefully before speaking about him. He was known as powerful, intelligent, and impossible to challenge, the head of one of the most influential families in the city. Everyone around him seemed to understand his position, his authority, and the control he held over the people who worked beside him. Yet after years inside his home, I noticed something most people overlooked. Behind the image of a man surrounded by wealth and loyalty, Vincent was often alone. He understood the value of information, but he rarely noticed the quiet people who witnessed everything happening around him, especially someone like me. The first time Vincent Blackwood truly looked at me was not because he needed something cleaned or because he wanted a task completed. It happened because I accidentally stepped into a part of his past that had been hidden for years. I was carrying documents through the library one afternoon when an old folder slipped from a high shelf and landed near my feet. At first, I thought it belonged to someone in the household, and I planned to return it without giving it another thought. But when I picked it up, I noticed the name written across the cover. Carter, my family name. For a moment, I simply stared at it because I had seen that name before, but never connected to someone like Vincent Blackwood. I remembered old photographs from my childhood and the one time my father had mentioned the Blackwood family before warning me never to ask questions. I opened the folder only slightly, telling myself I only needed to understand why my name was there. Inside were partnership agreements, historical records, and documents that suggested my family had been connected to a world I had spent my entire life believing was separate from mine. I was still trying to understand what I had discovered when I heard footsteps behind me. Vincent stood at the entrance of the library, his expression calm, but his eyes immediately focused on the folder in my hands. He did not look at me like a servant who had accidentally found something that did not belong to her. He looked at me like I was holding an answer to a question he had spent years trying to solve. He asked what I was doing with the folder, and I quickly closed it before handing it back, explaining that I had only found it and was about to return it. But instead of walking away, Vincent studied me carefully, as if he was seeing something he had never noticed before. He asked whether I had looked inside, and I could have lied. I could have told him I knew nothing and returned to the quiet role I had always played. That would have been easier. But something inside me knew the truth had already started to find its way into the open. When I admitted that I had seen my family name among the documents, Vincent Blackwood, the man who always seemed prepared for every situation, suddenly had no immediate answer. He took the folder from my hands and looked at the cover again, as though the name written there belonged to a memory he had buried long ago. Then he looked back at me and asked the question I never expected to hear from him, wanting to know exactly what I knew about my own family. I wanted to answer him. I wanted to explain everything I remembered and everything my father had kept hidden from me. But the truth was that I did not know enough, and that was what frightened me most. The secret I had spent years protecting was not only something hidden from Vincent Blackwood, it was something hidden from me as well. And as Vincent stood there holding the evidence of a past I never knew existed, I began to understand that the quiet maid everyone had ignored for years might have been connected to a secret powerful enough to challenge everything he believed about his own family. I thought the hardest part would be discovering that my family had a hidden connection to the Blackwood name. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing that the secret I had protected for years was only a small piece of a much larger story. The morning after Vincent found out about the folder, everything inside the mansion felt different. The halls were the same. The quiet rooms were the same. The people walking through the estate continued their routines as if nothing had changed. But I felt the difference. For the first time, I knew someone was looking at me differently. Vincent Blackwood was no longer ignoring me. He was watching, not in a way that made me uncomfortable, but in a way that showed he was searching for answers. That was something I was not used to. People usually looked at me and saw my uniform. They saw a maid. They saw someone who worked behind the scenes. They never wondered what I carried inside. Later that morning, Vincent asked me to meet him in the library, the same room where everything started. When I entered, the old folder was sitting on the table. Beside it were several other documents I had never seen before. Vincent stood near the window, looking over the city. "Emily, I need you to tell me everything your father ever said about the Blackwood family." I hesitated. The truth was, there was not much. My father was a quiet man. He believed some things were better left in the past. When I was younger, I once asked him why he kept an old photograph hidden in his desk. He looked at it for a long time before saying, "Some memories are not meant to be forgotten. They are meant to be understood at the right time." I never knew what he meant. Until now. I told Vincent about that photograph. I told him about the way my father avoided certain conversations. I told him how he always reminded me that a person's character mattered more than their name. Vincent listened carefully. That surprised me. A man like him was used to people explaining things because they wanted something. But I had nothing to gain. I only wanted answers. "Your father sounds like a man who made difficult choices," Vincent said. I looked at him. Vincent opened one of the documents. My family records show that someone named Thomas Carter was once considered one of the most trusted people around my grandfather. My breath stopped for a moment. Thomas Carter. My father's name. That cannot be possible, I whispered. My father lived a simple life. Vincent looked at the document. Maybe that was the point. Those words stayed with me. Maybe my father did not become ordinary because he had nothing else. Maybe he chose an ordinary life because he wanted something different. As we continued reviewing the records, we discovered more questions. My father's name appeared in important agreements, but later documents seemed to remove his involvement completely. Someone had changed the story. Someone had erased parts of the past. Vincent noticed it too. "This was not an accident," he said. I looked at him. Why would someone erase my father? He remained silent for a moment. Because sometimes the people who leave the most important marks are the ones others want forgotten. For years, I thought my father had hidden his past because he was ashamed of it. Now I wondered if the opposite was true. Maybe he hid it because he was protecting something valuable. Maybe he was protecting me. That afternoon, Vincent asked me a question I never expected. "Why did you stay here?" I looked confused. "What do you mean? You could have left after discovering this. You could have used this information to change your life." I thought about his words. The truth was simple. I never wanted his world. I never wanted power or attention. "Because I do not need someone else's name to know my value," I answered. For a moment, Vincent said nothing. Then he looked away. It was the first time I saw a small change in his expression. Not surprise. Not curiosity. Respect. The man who once saw me as just another person in his household was beginning to understand something. I was not valuable because of my connection to his family. I was valuable because of who I had always been. But before I left the library, Vincent received a message that changed everything. He read it quietly, then looked at me. "Someone else knows about these documents." My heart became heavy. "Who?" Vincent closed the folder. "I do not know yet. But they have been trying to keep this secret hidden for a very long time." And in that moment, I realized something. Finding the truth was not the end of the story. It was the reason the story was finally beginning. I thought knowing the truth about my father would finally make me feel closer to him. Instead, it made me realize how many years I had spent knowing only a small part of his life. The documents Vincent discovered were not just old records. They were pieces of a story that someone had carefully removed from history. And now, for the first time, I was beginning to understand that my father's quiet life had been built on choices most people never knew about. The following morning, Vincent asked me to meet him in the library again. The room that once felt intimidating now felt different. It was no longer just a place filled with expensive books and family history. It had become the place where hidden truths slowly came to light. Vincent placed several new documents on the table. "I found something else," he said. I looked at the papers in front of me. They were records from years ago, showing business agreements between the Blackwood family and my father. But there was something strange. Every document showed Thomas Carter's name, except the final versions. In those, his name disappeared completely. Someone wanted everyone to forget he was ever involved, I said. Vincent nodded. The question is why? That question followed me throughout the day. Why would anyone erase my father's contributions? Why would someone spend years hiding a connection that seemed important? I had spent my entire life believing my father was just a kind man who enjoyed a simple routine. But maybe simplicity was something he chose after experiencing a world I never knew existed. That evening, Vincent showed me an old photograph from his family collection. I recognized the person standing beside his grandfather immediately. My father. But he looked different. Not like the quiet man who prepared breakfast every morning and fixed things around our house. In the photograph, he looked confident. He looked like someone who belonged in a world of important decisions. I stared at the image for a long time. Why did he leave? I asked. Vincent looked at the photograph. According to what I found, your father believed loyalty did not mean following every decision made by powerful people. He believed loyalty meant doing what was right, even when it was difficult. Those words sounded exactly like my father. He always told me that a person could lose many things and still be successful if they never lost their principles. I never realized those lessons came from his own experiences. Later, Vincent and I continued searching through the records. We found a letter written by my father many years earlier. It was addressed to someone in the Blackwood family, but it had never been delivered. My hands shook slightly as I read the first lines. I hope one day Emily understands that I did not hide the truth because I was afraid. I hid it because I wanted her to have the freedom to choose her own path. I stopped reading. For a moment, I could not continue. My father had known that someday I might discover everything. He had known there would be questions, but he still chose to let me build a life without the weight of his past. Vincent remained silent beside me. He did not interrupt. He allowed me to have that moment with my father's words. When I finally looked up, I noticed something different about him. The cold confidence he usually carried was gone. He looked human. Your father cared about you more than his own reputation, Vincent said quietly. I nodded. That was always who he was. For years, I thought my father left a powerful world behind because he wanted to escape it. Now I understood. He left because he knew exactly what kind of person he wanted to become. But the discovery also created a new problem. Someone had not only hidden my father's history, they had hidden the reason behind his decision. And whoever did that had been watching these records for years. Before I left the library, Vincent received another message. His expression changed as he read it. They know we are looking, he said. I looked at him carefully. Who are they? Vincent placed the phone down and looked at the documents between us. The people who benefited from your father being forgotten. My heart became heavy, but something else appeared too. Determination. For the first time, I was not searching for answers because I was curious. I was searching because my father's choices deserved to be understood. And maybe the biggest secret was not what my father had left behind. Maybe it was what he had protected all along. I thought discovering the truth about my father would finally reveal the person who had hidden his past. I was wrong. The deeper we looked, the more I realized that the secret was not protected by one person. It was protected by years of silence. And breaking that silence meant understanding why so many people wanted the past to stay buried. The next morning, Vincent asked me to meet him before the estate became busy. When I arrived at the library, I noticed something different. The old folder was no longer sitting alone on the table. There were more documents, more photographs, and more evidence that connected my father to a world I never knew existed. Vincent looked tired. Not weak. Not uncertain. Just tired from carrying answers that had been hidden for too long. I found another record, he said. He handed me a document that appeared to be a business agreement. At first, I saw nothing unusual. Then I noticed a signature at the bottom. Thomas Carter. My father's name. But this time, there was something different. Beside his signature was a handwritten note. A promise. A reminder that some agreements were built on trust, not just profit. Your father was not just an employee or a partner, Vincent explained. He was someone my grandfather trusted completely. I looked at the document carefully. Then why would anyone erase him? Vincent did not answer immediately. He walked toward the window and looked over the city. Because sometimes the person who leaves is the person who knows too much. His words made me think about my father differently. Maybe he was not a man who disappeared from a powerful world. Maybe he was a man who chose to step away from something that no longer matched his values. Later that day, Vincent showed me a private archive room inside the estate. It was filled with records from decades ago. Old photographs, business files, letters from people whose names I recognized from history books. It felt strange seeing my father connected to all of it. I expected to feel proud. Instead, I felt something more complicated. I felt sadness, because I realized how much of his life I had never known. Did he ever talk about this? Vincent asked. I shook my head. Only once. He told me that a person's name means nothing if their choices do not honor it. Vincent looked at me quietly. That sounds like someone who understood power better than most powerful people. I smiled slightly. That was my father. As we continued searching, we discovered something that changed the way we viewed everything. A series of documents showed that my father had not left the Blackwood family because of disagreement alone. He had made a choice to protect people who had no power to defend themselves. He refused to support decisions that would have benefited a few while creating problems for many others. That was why he walked away. Not because he lost, because he refused to become someone he did not respect. For the first time, I understood why he never wanted me to know about this world. He was not trying to hide his achievements. He was trying to protect my ability to choose my own path. But the discovery also revealed something troubling. Someone had changed the records after my father left. Someone had removed his name from important documents and replaced the history with a version that benefited certain people. Vincent studied the records carefully. There is one person who had access to these files for years, he said. I looked at him. Who? Before he could answer, someone interrupted us with a message. Vincent read it silently. His expression became serious. The person who changed these records knows we found them. I felt the weight of those words. But this time, I did not feel like the woman who was simply cleaning rooms and staying unnoticed. I was the daughter of someone who stood by his beliefs even when nobody understood him. And now, I had a choice. I could continue hiding from a past that was never mine to fear. Or I could finally understand why my father chose the path he did. Vincent looked at me and said something I would never forget. Emily, your father spent his life protecting your freedom. Do not let fear take it away now. For years, I believed my father's secret was something that separated me from the world. Now I realized it was something that connected me to the truth. And the truth was finally ready to be seen. I thought understanding my father's past would bring me peace. Instead, it made me realize that some truths come with a responsibility. The more Vincent and I discovered, the more I understood that my father's silence was not a sign of weakness. It was a decision made by someone who valued principles more than recognition. But there was still one question I could not ignore. Who had spent years hiding the truth? The answer was closer than we expected. The following morning, Vincent asked me to join him in his office. It was the first time I had entered that room without feeling like I did not belong. Before, I had always been the maid who entered quietly, placed things where they needed to be, and left without being noticed. Now, I was sitting across from Vincent Blackwood as someone whose voice mattered. That change still felt unfamiliar. Vincent placed a collection of documents on the desk. I found the connection, he said. I looked at him carefully. Between my father and the person who changed the records? He nodded. Yes. The documents showed that after my father left the Blackwood family, certain decisions were made to remove his influence from official records. But one person had approved every change. Someone who had been trusted by both families. Someone who understood exactly what my father had chosen to protect. Who was it? I asked. Vincent remained quiet for a moment before answering. Richard Holloway. The name meant nothing to me, but Vincent clearly recognized it. Richard had been one of the closest advisors to his grandfather. A person who helped manage important decisions and preserve the family's reputation. Why would someone like that erase your father's history? I asked. Vincent looked at the documents. Because your father knew something he did not want revealed. I felt a quiet tension inside me. Not fear. Something different. The feeling of finally reaching the center of a mystery that had followed my family for years. Vincent explained that my father discovered certain decisions were being made without considering the people affected by them. Instead of staying silent, he questioned those decisions. He believed that leadership was not about protecting a powerful name. It was about protecting people. That belief created disagreements, and eventually, my father walked away. But before leaving, he kept copies of important documents. Evidence that the truth would survive even if people tried to rewrite history. Your father prepared for this possibility, Vincent said. I looked at him. He knew someone might try to erase everything. Vincent nodded. He knew that truth can be delayed, but it cannot disappear forever. Those words reminded me of everything my father taught me. He never told me to chase success. He told me to build character. He never told me to impress people. He told me to be someone I could respect when nobody was watching. For the first time, I understood that my entire life had been shaped by lessons from a world I never knew existed. Later that afternoon, Vincent and I visited an old storage room beneath the estate. Inside were boxes of documents that had been preserved for years. Among them was a letter addressed directly to me. My hands froze when I saw my name written in my father's handwriting. I opened it carefully. Emily, if you are reading this, it means you discovered the truth I hoped you would never need to carry. But if you did find it, remember this. Your identity is not defined by our family's history. It is defined by the choices you make. I had to stop reading for a moment. Those words felt like my father was speaking to me again. He was not giving me a legacy of power. He was giving me a legacy of courage. Vincent stood quietly beside me. He did not try to fill the silence. He understood that some moments belonged only to the people connected to them. When I finally looked up, I saw something different in his expression. He was not looking at me as the maid who worked inside his home. He was looking at me as someone who carried a story worth hearing. Your father was remarkable, Vincent said. I smiled softly. He was just my father. Vincent shook his head. Sometimes the people who seem ordinary are the ones who leave the greatest impact. Before we returned to the main house, Vincent received another message. He read it carefully and looked at me. Richard knows we found the letter. I held the document close. For years, my father's truth had been hidden. Now it was finally coming back into the light. But I also knew something else. The people who wanted the past forgotten would not simply accept that the truth had returned. And this time, I was no longer standing in the background. I was standing exactly where my father wanted me to be. I thought finding my father's letter would finally answer every question I had carried for years. Instead, it showed me that the most important answers were not about what happened in the past. They were about what I would choose to do with the truth now. The morning after we discovered the letter, everything inside the Blackwood estate felt different. The same walls surrounded us. The same people continued their routines. But I no longer felt like someone who belonged in the background. My father's words had changed something inside me. He had spent his life protecting my freedom, and I finally understood that hiding from the truth would never honor his sacrifice. Vincent noticed the change before anyone else. When I entered his office, he looked at me with a quiet respect that had not been there before. You are different today, he said. I smiled slightly. Maybe I finally understand why my father made the choices he did. Vincent nodded. On his desk were more documents connected to Richard Holloway. The evidence showed a pattern of decisions made over many years. Important information had been changed. Records had been adjusted. History had been rewritten to protect certain people. But the most surprising discovery was not what Richard had done. It was why he had done it. He believed he was protecting the Blackwood name, Vincent explained. I looked at the documents. By removing the truth. Vincent was silent for a moment. Then he answered. Some people believe protecting a legacy means hiding its mistakes. Your father believed protecting a legacy meant learning from them. Those words stayed with me. My father had never been interested in appearing powerful. He cared about being honest. He understood something many people forgot. A reputation built on silence could never be stronger than the truth. Later that day, Vincent and I met with members of the Blackwood organization who had spent years believing a different version of history. I expected people to dismiss me because of my position. I expected them to see a maid standing in a room where she did not belong. But that did not happen. This time, I walked into the room knowing exactly why I was there. Vincent introduced me differently. Not as an employee. Not as someone connected to a secret. He introduced me as Thomas Carter's daughter. The room became quiet. I saw people looking at me differently, but I realized something important. Their approval was no longer what I needed. My father had already given me the confidence to stand there. Vincent presented the documents carefully. He did not exaggerate. He did not try to control the conversation. He simply allowed the truth to speak. The records, the letters, the decisions my father made years ago. Everything showed the same thing. Thomas Carter walked away from power because he valued people more than influence. After the meeting, Vincent and I stood outside the estate. The afternoon was calm, and for the first time since discovering the secret, I felt peace. "You handled that better than most people would," Vincent said. I looked at him. I was not trying to prove anything. He smiled slightly. "That is exactly why you succeeded." I thought about those words. For years, I believed being overlooked was something I needed to overcome. Now I understood that it had given me something valuable. I learned how people behave when they think nobody important is watching. I learned the difference between kindness and performance. I learned that true character appears in ordinary moments. Vincent looked toward the estate. I spent my entire life believing power was the only thing that could protect what mattered. I turned to him. And now? He looked back at me. Now I think the right people matter more than power. It was the first time I heard him admit something so personal. The man everyone saw as untouchable was beginning to understand that leadership was not about controlling everything. It was about knowing what deserved protection. Before we returned inside, Vincent received one final message. He read it carefully, then looked at me. "Richard wants to meet." I felt a quiet tension, but I was not afraid. Months ago, I would have stepped away from something like this. I would have convinced myself it was not my place. But my father's letter reminded me of something important. Sometimes, the truth chooses ordinary people because ordinary people are the ones willing to protect it. I looked at Vincent and nodded. The past had found me. Now it was time for me to face it. I thought meeting Richard Holloway would finally reveal the person responsible for hiding my father's past. Instead, it revealed something much more complicated. I expected to find someone who only cared about protecting power. What I discovered was a man who had spent years convincing himself that his choices were necessary. The truth was not as simple as good versus bad. Sometimes the hardest battles are the ones between what people believe is right and what they are afraid to admit. The meeting was scheduled in a quiet private room away from the busy parts of the Blackwood estate. Vincent arrived first. I noticed something different about him. Before, he entered every room like someone who already owned the answer. That day, he entered like someone willing to listen. That small change told me more than any words could. When Richard arrived, he was older than I expected. He carried himself with confidence. But there was also something else in his expression. Regret. He looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "You look like your father." I did not know how to respond. For years, my father's name had been a mystery connected to a world I never understood. Now, I was sitting across from someone who had known him personally. "Why did you erase him from the records?" I asked. Richard looked down at the documents on the table. "Because I thought I was protecting the family." His answer surprised me. I expected excuses. I expected denial. Instead, I heard something that sounded almost like a confession. Richard explained that after my father left, the Blackwood organization faced difficult decisions. People were afraid that revealing disagreements from the past would damage everything they had built. So they chose silence. They removed uncomfortable parts of history. They created a version of events that was easier for people to accept. "Your father understood what we were doing," Richard said. "But he refused to be part of it." I looked at Vincent. He was listening carefully. This was not just about my father anymore. It was about the kind of future the Blackwood family wanted to create. "Did you ever regret it?" I asked Richard. He remained quiet for several seconds. Then he answered honestly. "Every day." Those two words carried more weight than a long explanation. Richard admitted that my father's greatest strength was not his knowledge or his position. It was his ability to walk away from something everyone else was afraid to question. He chose his values over comfort. He chose honesty over acceptance. After the meeting, Vincent and I walked through the estate gardens. The evening air was calm, and for once, there were no unanswered questions between us. "I thought power meant never admitting mistakes," Vincent said quietly. I looked at him. "And now?" He looked toward the old estate building. "Now I think refusing to admit mistakes is what makes people lose their way." That sentence stayed with me. Vincent Blackwood had spent years building an image of control. But the person I saw now was different. He was not becoming weaker by accepting the truth. He was becoming stronger. Later that night, Vincent gathered the documents my father had left behind. He made a decision that surprised everyone. He wanted the official records corrected. Not because it would improve his reputation. Not because it would make his family look better. He wanted the truth restored because it was the right thing to do. When I asked him why he cared so much, his answer was simple. Because someone should have done it years ago. I thought about the man I first met. The man who walked past me every day without knowing my name. The man who believed influence was measured by control. He was changing, and I realized something important. My father's secret did not change Vincent's empire because of the documents. It changed him because the truth forced him to see what he had ignored for years. Before I went to sleep that night, I opened my father's letter again. I read the final lines carefully. Never be afraid to stand where truth needs you. For the first time, I understood those words completely. My father had not left me a powerful name. He had left me a powerful choice. And now, Vincent and I were standing on the same side of that choice. But there was still one final question remaining. If the truth could change the past, could it also change the future? I thought the hardest part was discovering the truth about my father. I was wrong. The hardest part was accepting that the truth did not belong only to the past. It belonged to the choices we made after learning it. For years, my father carried a secret because he believed it was the only way to protect me. Now, I carried that secret because I had to decide what kind of person I wanted to become. The days after Richard Holloway admitted what happened were different inside the Blackwood estate. The atmosphere felt lighter, but not because everything was solved. Some wounds created by years of silence could not disappear overnight. They needed honesty. They needed time. Vincent understood that better than anyone. He began making changes quietly. He did not announce them to gain attention. He did not use the truth to strengthen his reputation. Instead, he focused on correcting what had been hidden for so long. Documents were reviewed. Records were restored. Decisions were reconsidered. For the first time, the Blackwood name was being connected with responsibility instead of simply power. I watched Vincent through all of this, and I realized how much he had changed. The man I first met believed everything could be controlled. He believed emotions created weakness. He believed distance protected him from disappointment. But now, he was learning something my father had understood years earlier. A person does not become respected because people are afraid of them. A person becomes respected because people trust their choices. One afternoon, Vincent found me in the library where everything had started. He looked at the old folder that had changed both of our lives. I used to think this folder contained a problem, he said. Now I think it contained a lesson. I smiled. What lesson? He looked at the documents for a moment before answering. That people are more than the roles we give them. His words stayed with me because I knew exactly what he meant. For years, Vincent saw me as a maid. That was the role I had inside his world. But he never saw the person behind that role until the truth forced him to look closer. I owe your father an apology, Vincent said quietly. I looked at him. He is not here to hear it. Vincent nodded. I know. But doing the right thing is not only about receiving forgiveness. Sometimes it is about becoming someone who deserves it. That was the moment I understood how much he had changed. He was no longer trying to protect an empire. He was trying to rebuild one based on something stronger. Trust. Later that week, Vincent invited me to a meeting where the restored records would be presented officially. When I entered the room, I noticed something immediately. People were not looking at me with curiosity anymore. They were looking at me with respect. But I also noticed something about myself. I did not need their respect the way I once thought I did. My father had taught me that value was not something other people could give or take away. It was something you carried with you. After the meeting, Vincent and I walked outside the estate. The evening sky was quiet, and the city lights reflected in the distance. Do you ever miss your old life? Vincent asked. I thought about the small apartment I shared with my memories of my father. I thought about the simple days when nobody knew my name. Sometimes, I admitted, but I do not miss being unaware of who I am. Vincent smiled slightly. That sounds like something your father would say. I laughed softly. He probably would. For a moment, there was no empire, no secrets, no family history, just two people standing in the same place, understanding how much had changed. But even after everything we discovered, one question remained. My father had protected the truth for years. Vincent had chosen to restore it. But there was still one final step. The world needed to know the story, not because my family deserved recognition, but because hidden truth can affect generations. And as I looked at the city that night, I realized something. The woman who once believed she was invisible had finally found her voice. The man who believed power was everything had finally learned what truly mattered. But the final chapter of my father's story was still waiting to be written. I thought the final truth about my father would be hidden forever. I was wrong. The truth was never meant to disappear. It was only waiting for the right people to have the courage to bring it back into the light. When I look back at everything that happened, I realized the biggest change was not the discovery of old documents or the restoration of a forgotten name. The biggest change was understanding that people can become different when they finally see what truly matters. The day the official records were restored, the Blackwood estate felt different. Not because the building changed. Not because the people inside suddenly became different. The change came from something deeper. For the first time in many years, the past was no longer being hidden. My father's choices were finally understood. Thomas Carter was remembered not as someone who disappeared from a powerful world, but as someone who walked away from it because he believed integrity mattered more than influence. I stood in the library that morning, holding the same folder that started everything. Months earlier, I had picked it up because it had fallen from a shelf. I never imagined that a simple moment would change how I saw my family, my past, and myself. Vincent joined me there. He looked at the documents with a quiet expression. "Your father changed more than he probably realized," he said. I smiled softly. He always believed small choices could create big changes. Vincent nodded. He was right. Those words meant more coming from him than anyone else. Because Vincent Blackwood was once a man who believed only powerful actions mattered. He believed influence came from control, reputation, and the ability to make people follow his decisions. But the truth had taught him something different. Real influence came from earning trust. Real leadership came from accepting responsibility. And real strength came from having the courage to change. Over the following weeks, Vincent continued rebuilding the foundation of the Blackwood organization. He made decisions differently. He listened more. He considered the people affected by every choice. Some people questioned why he cared so much about correcting mistakes from the past. But Vincent always gave the same answer. Because the past does not disappear just because people stop talking about it. I understood that more than anyone. My father's silence had protected me, but his truth had guided me. It showed me that a person does not need a powerful name to matter. They only need the courage to stand by what they believe is right. One evening, Vincent and I returned to the garden outside the estate. It was the same place where we had talked after the meeting with Richard, but everything felt different now. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if you never found that folder?" Vincent asked. I looked toward the old house. Sometimes, but I think some truths find people when they are ready to understand them. Vincent smiled. "Your father would have agreed." I looked at him. "You really respected him, didn't you?" He nodded. More than I realized at the time. That answer stayed with me. Because Vincent had spent years surrounded by people who wanted something from him. My father was one of the few people who challenged him to become better. And now, without even knowing it, my father had changed both of us. Vincent had taught me that even people who seem impossible to reach can grow. I had taught him that kindness and honesty were not weaknesses. Together, we learned that the greatest changes often begin with one person choosing to do the right thing when nobody is watching. Years later, people would remember the changes made inside the Blackwood Empire. They would talk about new decisions, restored records, and a different way of leading. But I would always remember something simpler. I would remember a quiet morning in a library, a forgotten folder, a hidden name, and the moment when the woman everyone overlooked finally discovered that she had never been invisible. She had been carrying a story worth hearing all along. My father left me no empire. He left me something more valuable. He left me the courage to find the truth, the strength to protect it, and the wisdom to understand that a person's worth is never measured by where they stand in the room. It is measured by the choices they make when the world is not looking.